Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our first parent learning hour of the fall 2021 semester. And today we're going to be talking about trauma-informed practices to support students and families. And we are incredibly lucky to have two guest speakers today from the Fairbanks North Star Borough School District. Chelsea Taylor is a social services manager with the Fairbanks district. She has earned her master's of ed in school counseling from UAF, and she currently serves under the Alaska Project Aware grant, advancing wellness and resiliency in education as a behavioral health specialist. She has a background in social work and counseling, including child protection, parenting education, nutrition counseling for high-risk women and children. And in her current role with the district, she provides direct school-based mental health services and wraparound support to students and families at West Valley. We also have with us Melissa Zatica. I'm sorry, Melissa, if I just totally mangled that. She has a master's degree in social work as well, with an emphasis in children and families. She's also a social service manager for the Fairbanks district. She works directly with Alaska Native and American Indian students. She's been with the school district since January of 2020 and has practiced social work in the community for about 5 years. She also loves to balance her work with her downtime and can find her hanging out with her family, and in the summer, kayaking on the river or sitting at the Carlson Center watching hockey when we can actually watch it and we're not in pandemic protocols. Now, I'm going to turn it over to Chelsea and Melissa, and we're going to take a moment to recognize what day it is.
And Melissa Zatica will start us off here. We'll be covering several main topics today. What is trauma? What does that trauma look like at home, and some coping skills, and how we can better connect that school and family partnership.
Hi, everybody. My name is Melissa. I'm actually going to turn my video off because my internet's been a little wonky in my office. So I'm just warning you of that before I do it. So our first thing that we're going to really look at is what is trauma. Trauma itself, as defined by the American Psychological Association, is an emotional response to a terrible event. The Center for Child Trauma Assessment added to that definition, stating that the event is scary, dangerous, violent, and/or life-threatening. The DSM, which is the Diagnostic Statistic Manual, added to that again and defined trauma as an exposure of a patient to a traumatic or stressful event and the psychological distress following that exposure. So if we look at trauma itself, it's an emotional response to an event that is not only scary and dangerous and sometimes life-threatening, but also has an emotional response afterwards. There are a lot of different types of trauma, and this is just some of the common ones. We got these lists from the National Child Traumatic Stress Network, the American Psychological Association, and the Center for Children Trauma Assessment. So I'm not going to go through this list extensively. I'm just going to hit on a few of them. One of the ones we're seeing most in schools is the bullying and the cyberbullying, and that affects a lot of children in a lot of different ways. There is also that of medical trauma. It can be from a medical condition that the student has, that the family has, or it can also be a medical trauma due to the pandemic that we're living in right now. We can also look at grief as a major source of trauma, as well as community violence, adverse childhood experiences. And I also want to hit on the physical, emotional, and sexual abuse piece of it, because that is a major type of trauma that we are seeing a lot in our schools and just seeing a lot as people continue to deal with that through their lives. And then the last one I'm really going to hit on is complex trauma, because that is something that we're seeing a lot of right now due to the pandemic and the compounded trauma from that. That's what we're seeing in schools and also in our community. So when we're thinking of trauma itself, we're thinking of the event, but we don't really think about what happens in the body when we're experiencing that trauma and that trauma response. So when we're thinking about what happens in the body and we're going through trauma, the first thing that happens is the brain thinks we're in imminent danger and then sends those signals out to our bodies. So our bodies are responding with a variety of different ways. That picture is an amazing thing to look at to see what exactly our body is doing. But typically it responds with our heart rate accelerating, our digestion is actually slowing, and our adrenaline production is rising, giving us what we need to either do the flight or flight response. With that, our heart rate also increases, and so does our breathing, and our hearing becomes selective. Something else that happens is our eyes become kind of like a tunnel vision. So we are only seeing specific things. And when we are responding to trauma, a lot of the time we are responding because of what our body is doing. So I hit on responses to trauma in the last slide, but this is really just diving a little deeper into that. So the first thing I want to do is talk about the picture a little bit because it goes through the trauma responses. It goes through the typical ones we hear, which are flight, fight, and freeze, but it also goes through fawn. So when we're looking at flight itself, there's some things that we don't really think of when we're thinking about trauma itself. When we think of flight, we think of running away and just removing from the situation. But there's other ways of doing that. It can be working too much and being a workaholic. It can be an overthinker. It can be having some mental health concerns such as anxiety, panic attacks, and OCD. And it can also be a hyperactivity of not being able to sit still and just not being able to do anything that isn't perfect and being that perfectionist. When we're thinking about fighting, when we think about fighting, we're thinking of the anger outburst. We think of the bully, but there's also having that explosive behavior and being a narcissist and having to be in control of the situation at all times. When we're thinking of freezing, we're thinking more of just difficulty making those decisions, that people are feeling stuck and not knowing what to do, causing them to disassociate from what's going on. Sometimes it's isolating, and sometimes they just say that they feel numb. The one I really want to hit on is the fawning one because a lot of people don't think about it. But when people are in the fawning stage of a trauma response, they're usually trying to please people. And with trying to please people, they're trying to fit in, which means that they are changing who they are and changing their identity depending on who they're with. And they don't feel a true sense of identity for themselves. They just feel the identity that they see around everybody else. And typically they get overwhelmed, they are codependent, and there is also not a real sense of boundaries. So when we're looking at trauma response as a whole, though, trauma response can be based on an event that happens or a stimuli that mimics the event. A really good example is someone is in a car accident, whether it's a student or an adult, and they have a trauma that is that car accident. And then they're afraid of getting into cars or even seeing cars because that is a trauma response that is seen from just seeing a vehicle or even hearing it on the road. We also have the dreaded I don't know in here. What the dreaded I don't know is when we are talking to students about something that's going on, or even our children in general, and their answer is, I don't know. What I don't know means is that they don't know how to explain what is going on in their body because they just aren't to the point that they can. So that is why it is so important to explore their I don't know with questions, having them explain what's going on in their body, having them explain why they're feeling the way they're feeling, and going from there, just so we know that the child in the car accident doesn't know why they feel scared. They just know that they are. So they say, I don't know, and just exploring, what is your body doing? How do you feel? And then going, okay, so it's sounding like you're scared. Is that what's going on? And going from there. So it's really just about open communication.
If I could, I would just add quickly to that too, Melissa, is asking those pointed questions. So if we couple slides back, as we were looking at that body diagram, asking those pointed questions about, that we know parts of the body that we know trauma manifests in, right? So a lot of kids, stomach aches, digestional issues is a big one. So what does your stomach feel like? And giving them the opportunity to describe those types of things will give you better insight into maybe what's going on inside. So when we are talking about trauma and trauma triggers with students, what we're basically talking about is how do we get a child's brain from being in that survival brain versus the learning brain. So when we think of the brain, we are the survival brain, that prefrontal lobe is that executive functioning, right? So in this part of your brain, you're thinking, I am calm. This is where I learn. I am safe. And these are the type of things your prefrontal lobe is thinking when you're in that learning brain. When you're in that survival brain, it's the, I'm scared. I'm not thinking correctly. I'm unsure if I'm safe. I don't know how to react to this. I may want to scream. I may want to yell. And then we're looking at that other part of the brain, which is the limbic system. And this is the emotional part of our brain, where our emotions are functioning. Things are changing. If we're in that survival brain, students are often not comfortable with change. They're feeling nervous. They're feeling unsure, questioning all those different types of emotions. So to get to that learning brain, we know when we're in the learning brain, we are open to receiving new information. We're open to new things. When we're in our learning brain, we're feeling calm, almost a sense of peace. We may be really curious about new things and learning, and we're not fearful of making mistakes. Versus that survival brain, where we are hyper-focused on the threats around us or what we may perceive as threats. The survival brain really thinks in terms of black and white. The survival brain feels really panicky, maybe obsessive over things, wants things to get over with, not willing to kind of have that growth mindset of exploring new ways to do things. And the survival brain is really afraid of making mistakes. So the survival brain also always trumps the learning brain, right? So if we are triggered by a trauma, we go into that survival brain, and that survival brain always trumps that learning brain. So what's the best way of how we get from that survival brain back into the learning brain? And that really is done by reducing stress and being able to recognize and respond to our trauma triggers. And for students, a big piece of that is the support of adults in their lives and them feeling supported by that. So this is just a nice quote here talking about trauma and that emotional response that we feel and the long-term effects that we can feel. So won't read it all to you. Just give you a moment here to read that. Okay, so we've talked about trauma. We've talked about those trauma responses. So how do we deal with that? How can we support our children? How can we support our families in responding to that trauma? So CASEL, which stands for the Collaborative for Academic and Social Emotional Learning. This is a major trusted source for highly effective and evidence-based social emotional learning. So social emotional learning is sort of a buzzword that you may have heard over the last couple of years. And these are the social emotional competencies. So these are, the competencies that students and adults need to be successful. think we can go to next slide real quick. I think I got mixed up. Yeah, so here we go. Social emotional learning is the way that students and adults learn and practice the knowledge and attitudes and skills necessary to understand and manage emotions, set and achieve positive goals, feel and show empathy for others, establish and maintain positive relationships, and make responsible decisions. So at the elementary level, in schools, a lot of school social workers and counselors, used to call this set of skills maybe social skills. And now social emotional learning is the term to kind of encompass all those skills that students need to be successful. And many of these skills are ways that are positive coping skills to address trauma and trauma triggers and those behaviors. So we'll dive into each competency here in a little bit. Really, the benefits of social emotional learning, there's been a ton of research on it. And ongoing research has showed that after just like 3.5 years of social emotional skill instructions for students, they do score better than peers on standardized testing, improved attitudes and behaviors, loss of negative behaviors. So replacing, negative behaviors with positive behaviors or coping skills, and reduction in emotional stress. Students that received social emotional learning instructions and skills also had higher high school and college graduation rates, and had lower rates of becoming involved in the juvenile justice system. And we know these skills from looking at that wheel of those skills: responsible decision-making, self-awareness, self-management. Those are all skills that employers are also looking for too. There's been studies done by, Forbes magazines and what top companies are looking for. And, it's these skills. They want to hire employees that are self-aware, organized, have self-management skills, responsible decision-making, all of those skills. So self-awareness, when we're thinking of self-awareness, it's the ability to accurately recognize one's own emotions, thoughts, and values, and how they influence our behavior. And so what social awareness looks like, you're identifying emotions, you're recognizing strengths, having self-confidence, self-efficacy, and being able to describe how you feel. So when we're working with students or our own children, self-awareness may sound like, how am I feeling today? When am I at my best? When do I feel angry and why? What stresses me out? Where do I fit into my community? So all of these emotional processing questions, being self-aware of how we're feeling. And a big tool that I love to use with students and my own children is the emotions wheel, because we know there is huge array of emotions, right? It's not just mad, sad, happy. And oftentimes students are feeling these other emotions, or children are feeling these other emotions, but don't have that emotional vocabulary to really describe what they're feeling. So oftentimes, you start with that main emotion, anger. I see you're angry, but then digging deeper to figure out what that anger may actually be, what emotion they may actually be feeling. So this just gives students and adults also the tools to be able to kind of accurately describe really what we're feeling, because oftentimes it's easy just to say, man, I'm angry. Well, we may also be, jealous, and we may be regretful, and that manifests in those angry behaviors. So this is an awesome tool that I like to use with children to expand that emotional vocabulary as well. So self-management, this is the ability to successfully regulate one's emotions, thoughts, and behaviors. effectively managing stress, controlling impulses, motivating oneself, and the ability to set and work towards personal and academic goals. So when we're thinking about self-management skills, what we want students and children to be able to articulate is, expressing, man, I need a break right now. These are things that you want to be able to hear. May I please have some space? I'm not ready to share right now, but maybe in a minute. I think I need help with this. I don't understand this yet. So really being able to, first with those self-awareness skills, recognizing those emotions, and then being able to manage those emotions, right? That's the key piece. So with those self-management skills, you're really looking at increasing those self-discipline skills, self-motivation, and then things like goal setting. I hear you saying you need space right now. Let's take a break and come back in 10 minutes, waiting for turns, and being able to focus despite distractions, things like that. So relationship skills, this is the third competency for Castle's SEL skills, the ability to establish and maintain healthy and rewarding relationships with diverse individuals and groups. So relationship skills, we're focusing on things like communication, we're focusing on social engagement, building relationships, teamwork, expressing concerns for others, expressing empathy, making suggestions in a polite way. So some of those things you're looking for, what does relationship skills sound like? These are some of the questions, students may be able to say as far as, can you explain what you mean by that? I disagree with you because, or what did you mean by this? So being able to effectively communicate with others. So social awareness, the ability to take the perspective of others and empathize with others, including those from diverse backgrounds and cultures. The ability to understand social and ethical norms for behaviors and recognize family, school, and community resources for support. So for social awareness, this is really, again, to taking perspective of others, empathy, getting along with different types of people, being able to work in a group and contribute to group efforts. Another major skill to help reduce some of those triggers. So responsible decision-making, this is the final competency. And what we're looking at here for responsible decision-making is, identifying problems and analyzing problems, being able to work through the steps to solve problems, reflecting and evaluating on that decision-making process. And also for students being able to accept responsibility for things that they've done, learning from experiences, and reflecting, and also ethical decision-making. So learning what's right from wrong. Some process questions for children, how will this impact others? Why did I make the choice I did? Was it a strong choice? Will this help me? So depending on the age of students or children, those can vary. So tools for SEL at home. We've talked a lot about, the overlapping, the overarching framework of social emotional learning and what those competencies are. But what does this look like? What are things we can do with our children? So regulation. So different types of regulation here. We have social emotional regulation, self-regulation, and co-regulation. So that emotional regulation, really what we're looking at is the ability to manage one's own emotions and behaviors. And this is big when we're thinking about trauma, right? So we have that trauma trigger, and how do we self-regulate with those emotions. This is being able to calm ourselves down when we're getting upset, adjusting to unexpected change. And then when we're looking at self-regulation, it can be disruptive by prolonged stress or anxiety or trauma. But this also can be strengthened by co-regulation, where we're talking about, how a person can adjust their own emotions with a parent or a caregiver. So we know that, children can't re-regulate if, as the adult or the teacher or the caregiver, if our emotions are unregulated, so that's what we're really looking at when we think about co-regulation. So when we as adults and caregivers, provide warm and responsive interactions, we can really then be a support and a coach for our children to respond in the same way. So some trauma-informed regulation strategies. I really love these trauma-informed statements, instead of just what we all kind of want to default as like, what's wrong? What's going on? Trauma-informed statements are really looking at, okay, what is causing this, and being able to give space and opportunity to process those emotions. So if you are feeling sad, you can tell me about it. I can see you're really upset. What do you need from me? I can see, this is a kind of, I can see this assignment is really hard for you. Is it okay if I sit with you and help you? It's providing space for children to express what they need. And I like this one. How can I come back? How about I come back to you in 5 minutes? I want to make sure you're okay. So giving them time to feel those emotions, but also knowing that as the safe caregiver, you're going to come back and continue to support them no matter what feelings they're having. Some other trauma-informed regulation strategies to really calm your system. So when we're in that trauma response system, we really need to kind of complete that stress cycle to fully go through that response effectively. So when we're thinking about trauma responses for regulation, we really want to get our bodies involved as well. So belly breathing is a great tool. Putting your hands on your belly, taking deep breaths, and those mindfulness strategies of noticing how your body is feeling when you're doing that. Grounding techniques are great tools to calm our body. Progressive muscle relaxation for little guys. Freeze dance game is often a good one if we're unregulated. It gets your whole body moving, and then maybe doing a breathing exercise at the end. But like I said, you really want to complete that stress cycle and give students the opportunity to feel those emotions, progress through them effectively, and then to be able to move on. So zones of regulation, some of you may have heard of this tool in your students' schools or in the community. Here in the Fairbanks North Star Borough School District, this is one that many counselors and school social workers use with students. It is gives students some more language around our emotions we're feeling, right? So these are the 4 zones, the blue zone, green zone, yellow zone, red zone, and different feelings within those zones. There's no good zones or bad zones. It's okay to be in the red zone. It's okay to feel mad. But then how do we get back into that green zone? What are the tools that we can use when we're feeling upset to get back into that green zone where we feel happy, ready to learn, and ready for challenges? So this is lots of information out there about zones of regulation. If you just do a quick Google search, and this is something that you can use, students can use at school and also at home, and gives them language on how they are feeling. Man, I'm really feeling in the blue zone today. and then opens that door for opportunities to have the conversation of, okay, well, what are some of those tools we can use to get back into that green zone? So mindfulness, this is another kind of, I would say, buzzword too, that's kind of been thrown out there a lot recently. But mindfulness really is that practice of just focusing on your current moment and your current experience. So it doesn't have to be full-blown meditation or anything like that, but it really is just calming your body and calming your mind to be able to reset and re-regulate. So we can, yep, there you go. Okay, so 5 mindful habits to teach mindfulness and self-regulation. For this, we're really looking at, mindfulness really is that mental exercise, right, for our brain in order to calm our body. I won't go through all these just for time's sake here, but being present, planning purposeful time with children, practicing those active listening skills. Being calm, practicing breathing, different breathing exercises, whether it's the belly breathing or some grounding exercises. Being compassionate, grateful, and reflecting. So gratitude, that being grateful one, there's a lot of recent research too on showing how gratitude can really affect emotions as well. So practicing daily gratitude, whether it's journaling or just waking up and, starting kids' days off with things that you're grateful for.
Okay, so we're going to hit on one of the major traumatic events a little bit that has happened in the last 20 or so years since September 11th, and that is the COVID-19 pandemic. So in March of 2020, this is geared towards schools, but it really does affect everyone, even our adult children that we have. So in March of 2020, students and families themselves were forced to transition from what was normal life to being at home for anywhere from 3 months to 18 months. So depending on the area for school itself, in our country and even in Alaska itself, students were out of school anywhere from 3 months to as long as 18. And there are still some that have not transitioned to in-person learning again. So this has impacted not only our students, but also everyone in the same way as that of a natural disaster or a major traumatic event. The major difference between a natural disaster or that of a major traumatic event is that COVID-19 is still developing because we're still in the pandemic, and the trauma that we have and are associating with COVID-19 is also still developing and will continue to develop as long as we are in the pandemic itself. The trauma that we have seen from COVID-19 itself has been likened to that of a post-traumatic stress disorder episode, and the symptoms have been likened to being very similar. When we are looking at COVID-19 and our school communities themselves, we wanted to put something in to just put out that COVID-19 isn't just affecting our students, and it can be the same can be said for any of our social service agencies, but it is affecting the entire community. And the trauma that's being shown in all of our children and in ourselves is also existing in the staff of those programs. And during the height of not only school shutdown, but even our country's shutdown, they had to adapt how they practiced and how they supported families. Teachers had to not only teach in person, but also teach virtually for students that were not able to be in person at that time. And in some ways, that is still continuing today. In schools, they're still making sure that everything is accessible for students that are having to quarantine due to illness or even just to close exposure. And the same can be said for all of our social service agencies. So with that, I'm going to put a plug in to please, I know it's hard, but be kind to all of our staff because they are experiencing the pandemic just the same as all of our families. But when we're looking at COVID-19 itself, and we're looking at how it is looking in students and in our children, we are seeing that trauma from COVID is looking different in different students. And as I mentioned before, it's still developing, and students are still showing different behaviors that are associated with that trauma. However, there are some common areas of concern that have been seen, especially in the last year. The first is that of social anxiety. When COVID first hit and Alaska closed down in March, everybody was pulled home. Everybody who wasn't essential had to work from home or not work at all. And our students and our children had to stay home to stay safe. And with that, it was anywhere from 3 months to 6 to sometimes families are still staying home because of the trauma of COVID. So a lot of our students and our children are seeing rises in social anxiety because we went from seeing our friends and seeing coworkers and everything every day to not seeing them for 3 months and not being in school for anywhere from 3 months to 18. So a lot of anxiety is around coming back and being around so many people. Aggression is also seen a lot because, as I mentioned earlier, as a trauma response, and as Chelsea mentioned in the SEL piece, we are seeing that students are needing more support because they aren't knowing how to process the emotions that they have. So aggression is a huge thing that we're seeing, whether it's anger or just passive aggressiveness with some of our students. It's just huge that we're seeing. And then we also have hyperactivity. Hyperactivity is something that students haven't really had to focus as much that we've seen, especially being at home because there's all these different stimuli and they're coming back into our school buildings and they're not being able to sit still and focus because they haven't really had to, and they're having to learn how to be in a school system again for the first time. Even our high schoolers are having issues coming back into traditional learning. Depression is also pretty big because we are seeing all of our students come back in and they're all experiencing trauma from COVID-19, and everybody's trauma is different depending on how their families experienced COVID and what has happened within their families. So a lot of our students are showing depression symptoms as well. And immaturity. I put this in because I've talked to a few of our different teachers in a numerous amount of grades in the Fairbanks North Star Borough. And what they've noticed is from anywhere from elementary school all the way up to high school, the maturity level that all of our students are coming back in with is very different than what they would have experienced pre-pandemic, because all of our students regressed a little bit to cope with what was going on. And they haven't, like I said, they haven't had to be in a school system so they have to relearn all of those processes to be in school. I also wanted to hit on the grief and fear aspect of it a little bit. When we are looking at grief, we're looking at the fact that children and families themselves are grieving the loss of a lot of different things because of COVID. And there's going to be a lot of loss reminders from that grief. What a loss reminder is that it is people, places, and even things that remind you of a loss. For COVID-19, that could be driving by a school when your student hasn't been able to go for a few weeks. It could be driving past the Carlson Center for me because I'm a huge hockey fan and not getting to watch hockey last year. And it could even be something as simple as driving past an area where your kiddos used to hang out with their friends and not being able to because of COVID. It is important when we're looking at grief to allow the time for the mourning. So when we're talking about mourning, we're talking about grieving that loss of normalcy, as well as maybe grieving the loss of a family member or a friend that the pandemic took. So it's important to make that space to allow for that grief and that mourning, because we don't want it to bottle up and to have that trauma compound and make it more complex because there wasn't a place for the student and our children and even ourselves to let it out. And then when we're talking about fear, we're talking about unpacking the fear that we have and ensuring and taking small steps to ensure safety. So for that, we just need to acknowledge the emotions. We need to accept that for our children themselves, we as caregivers and school staff and community members may actually be the focus of their emotions, because with the pandemic, in some ways, we've taken away their safe space to experience their emotions. And as they are letting their emotions out, they are feeling safer in releasing that emotion. And I also want to hit on this one. as caregivers and as family members to make the time for yourselves to process the ongoing events that are going on and the events that have gone on in the last year and a half. Because if we can't process the events ourselves and work through them, we can't truly support our children and our students in doing that because we're still stuck and working through our own trauma. This one is about how we can support students in school, but this can also be for any community support that your family is utilizing. So when we're looking at school specific and community support specific, the first is social emotional learning. Chelsea gave an amazing overview of social emotional learning in schools through CASEL. So I'm going to skip over that one. But I also wanted to talk about supportive environment. This can be through resources that you're utilizing for your family or utilizing in the school system. And in the school system, that could be having a quiet place students can go to calm down if they get overstimulated. It can be walking around the building 3 times with the PE teacher to just calm down, or the counselor or the social service manager. For collaboration with community resources, this is put in just so that when something is going on, communicating that to school staff, community resources, so that we can collaborate and work to make it easier on you and your family, because we don't want you guys to feel all alone going through this, because you're not. And there are supports put in place in the school to help you. And for family and school partnership, this can be for any community resource. It's just that open communication about what's going on. That way you can get the support your family needs and deserves from not only the school, but community resources as well. When we're looking at family support, open conversations about COVID has been seen to be really important, whether it's this is going on or, hey, this is your friend just is in quarantine. They did test positive. I heard from their mom that you also are going to have to quarantine. This is why, and we're also going to get tested just to be safe. It can also be unpacking emotions for open conversations. A lot of people, when COVID-19 first started, they were glued to their television. I was, and just that can be hard on families and children, especially when unpacking what's going on, because it's scary. It was a very scary thing when it first started, and in some ways it's still very scary. I put strong support system on here because every family has a support system of their own. It can be blood related, it can be friends, it can be community resources, but it's important to rely on your support system when you need it, and also be a support system for other people as they need it, because that is going to give you guys the space to really unpack your emotions when you need it, and also be there and support everyone else who needs it. I put open communication with the school. It is the same as community and family partnerships. We can't help if we don't know what's going on. You don't have to tell us everything, just giving us a brief overview of what's going on. That way we can support not only students, but also their families. And then coping strategies. Chelsea hit on a lot of amazing coping strategies within the SEL piece of it, such as the mindfulness and the strategies that she did for regulation. These are ones that you can use. A personal favorite of mine is actually I turn music up and I dance around the kitchen. That is an amazing strategy for coping and working through stress.
Okay, so school and family partnership. This is a huge piece of supporting our children. So for time's sake, we'll kind of just move through here. So parent-teacher conversations. Like I mentioned, we know that the school-family partnership is vital to our children's success in school, and that parents can't do it alone and teachers can't do it alone. It's really that strong partnership that supports our children. So these were some tips that from the CASEL Social Emotional Learning Collaborative regarding parents, reaching out to teachers. I know sometimes that can be intimidating, but just assuming the best intentions on the teacher's behalf. We know issues arise, and going into it with a positive frame of mind. Ask yourself, what are the desired goals for the conversations with teachers? What are you wanting to get out of these conversations with your teacher? Initiating those conversations, whether it be by email or phone. We know everyone's busy. Parents are extremely busy with kiddos and all the things. And so just initiating that conversation is a huge piece of that success. And then following up on the conversation if there's some left pieces kind of hanging out there, right? So making sure that the needs are met on both sides for you as a parent, and also for the school end. So we, of course, are here in the Fairbanks School District. I know you participants on this meeting may be from all over, but there are a ton of resources within our school districts, and some you may not even know about. So I really encourage you to reach out to, whether it's your student's teacher, or the principal, and look into those many resources. Here at the Fairbanks School District, we have school counselors, we have school social workers, we have school psychs, behavior techs, our SPED case managers, our Alaska Native Education Program, Migrant Ed Education, our ABLE program for autism and behavior education liaisons, our McKinney-Vento program, and this is for families in living transitions, in our MFLAX. So when we think about trauma, right, we've spent the last hour talking about trauma. We have these huge supports that can help students, and especially those school social workers, those school counselors, school psychs. That is, what they are there for. So please don't be afraid to reach out and talk to those supports about maybe some traumas that your family or student has experienced. And there's a lot of ways we can support students through various services within school. So just educating yourself on what services your school district does have can be really beneficial for your family and for your student, to make sure they are able to access all of the services that are available to them. So we'll just kind of wrap up here. We really appreciate you guys sharing our time, and part of one of Castle's signature SEL practices is having an optimistic closure. And this can be done in a wide range of ways. And so I just invite you to think to yourself about one thing that kind of stuck with you today. And we'll kind of wrap up here, leave time for some questions. But this is a practice we use with students in school to kind of wrap up that class or that lesson, and making sure everyone feels included, and then giving them that little, nudge as far as processing one thing that kind of stuck with them that day. So again, thank you guys, and we're open to questions if we have time, Anna.
Yes, please. We do have a few minutes left. If anyone has any questions, if they have a specific situation and they're looking for strategies or places to go look. If you have any questions about the presentation, please go ahead. You can either unmute yourself or put it in the chat.
I thought it was interesting to, in regards to the review for the trauma response behind PTSD associated with the COVID. But that makes perfect sense. When you think about it, just everything that has, how it just affects everybody. And so that, I know it's a no-brainer when you indicated it, but it just kind of really hit home with me. How we respond to everything that's just going on. Our lives are just like been thrown into this craziness, and everything is just so different, and so how we respond to that is, it's just been a wild year for sure for everybody. I really like that, what do you call it, that one wheel, yeah, I really like that, because I know with both my son and daughter, we struggle with, we just had this conversation yesterday when he said he wasn't angry. He talked about something that we talked about a couple of days ago, and typical for him, he'll come back and say, I wasn't angry about that situation. This is what happened, because he's trying to clarify himself, because in his mind, it's just so black and white, right? So, but to be able to give him that language of kind of digging a little bit deeper about, well, maybe he wasn't necessarily angry, but he was upset, and trying to figure out those words, providing those words to him so he can better explain where he was at in that moment. I really like that wheel, though. I plan to like print that out and show that to him.
Has anybody ever seen either Arthur, where he turns into Minimoy and gets shrunk and he drives that little car, or Stuart Little, where he drives that car in the park? I think about our lives as we're in our little car going along, and there's some bumps, but we're okay. And then the pandemic, pretty much somebody big picked us up and threw us in a dryer. And now we're all going like this, bumps and bruises. There's no signs of where we're going. There's no end in sight. And so I think when you think about trauma like that, it can be scary, but it can be also more understandable to explain it like that, because, eventually it's going to end. We just have to hold on until we get there and deal with the bumps and bruises while we can.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. We've had to respond very quickly to this trauma. And so allowing ourselves some space and some grace to process what's really happened in the last year and a half, because it all started and it snowballed quickly. So we've all had to respond quickly in response to that. So
we had a comment in the chat. The diagram of the feelings really stuck to me because I grew up without knowing how to really communicate my feelings besides the big five. Therefore, the list was really, these feelings will not just help me communicate to the children, but also help the children's vocabulary so they can express themselves more.
I just wanted to piggyback on everyone's the self-awareness wheel. I don't know how to get it, but it would be nice.
I will be sending it out.
Okay. Yeah, my son's practically nonverbal. So, if he continues that way, because one of the irritating things for me, the trauma is because he's been out of school and school's been limited, it's impacted his development for language. I've taken Hannon myself, I do what I can when I'm not at work. So these last, almost 2 years now, right, have impacted us on his development. And that's what's frustrating to me. And, to me, in my background, realistically, this isn't going to end. It's a virus. So, it's a new life. We need to, I don't know if it's time for,
it's an adjustment to a new normal.
Yes. And, even more clear awareness that needs to be, educated amongst, the people. So we kind of understand the realistic world we're living in now, and how to cope with that. So, and I just wanted to share too, I love the regulate emotion part of it, because to me it's this, even though it kind of focused on our children, I mean, it was really for us. So I thought it was a great reminder that, I first need to regulate my emotion before I start wanting to regulate my own child's. So that was really cool. Yeah, you too. That's my daughter, Brooke. My son is the one with Down syndrome. So he's the one, kind of taking this for. And I just wanted to thank you guys. And there was another. Oh, I did have a question. Is this a time for questions?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The zones that the school is using. I don't know, since a lot of our children are, that are here are on the spectrum. Mm-hmm. I just thought it was interesting that when they're excited or silly or wiggly, it wouldn't be in the happy zone. It would be in the yellow zone. Because to me, when you have kiddos in the spectrum, that can't necessarily regulate physically a certain way, they're excited. Silly Wiggly is happy. So I just wanted to kind of put that in there.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. And like I mentioned, no zone is seen as bad by any means. And
Yeah.
maybe for that student, for that unique student, that's yellow zone, when they are feeling excited and wiggly, like that's a great zone for them to be in, just depending on the need. So I think those, yeah, excellent point, in that we need to be open to all those zones, and that each zone looks a little different for each individual child. Absolutely.
Well, I want to thank Chelsea and Melissa for taking the time out to come and do this for us. I really appreciate you guys being here, especially on this 20th anniversary. I really appreciate all of the attendees, especially the new faces and the old faces, because I like seeing everybody. Next month, we will actually be having some more guest speakers. We're going to have some of the related providers come in and talk to us about the process for PT, OT, speech language pathology, and the differences between what it looks like in school and what it can look like privately, and that process. It is, once again, 10 a.m. the second Saturday of next month. And if you haven't already signed up, please do so, and we'd be happy to have you.
Thank you for having us again.
Thank you, guys.